Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to our podcast. I'm Paul Whitcombe, former state's attorney and federal law clerk, and I'm sitting here with John William Touhy, author of many wonderful books and the founder of our podcast, and Camillus Robinson, a podcaster of some renown and also an author. And today on Killers, Kings, and Clowns, we are interviewing Frank Calabrese Jr., an author of a best-selling book, The Family Secrets Trial, and we are welcoming Mr. Calabrese Jr. here today. Welcome, sir.
Welcome.
Thank you.
We're so glad to hear you and would have you with us today. Could you tell us about your book? Do you have a copy of it you could hold up for the folks?
I think I came unprepared.
There,
I got you. We have.
I got you, brother. One with me. It's yeah. There you go. Okay.
I got you, brother.
Yeah. So, real quick, what the book is even though the title might throw you, it's really a family story, and that's what I try to talk about. It's about how I was kind of born into this life. You know, our family background. I'm half Irish, half Italian. My dad's side was my Italian side. My mother's side was my Irish side. On my Italian side, my dad and my uncle, Nick Calabrese, both were made members of the Chicago mob. On my Irish side, my grandfather, Ed Sticks Hanley, he ran with the O'Donnell gang. It was a West Side gang. He was involved in a very historical shootout with Al Capone's gang. My uncle Ed, on my Irish side, Ed Hanley, became the international president of the Hotel and Restaurant Employees Union.
Yeah, quite a guy. Can I ask what shootout that was? Because our people were.
Yeah.
The Pony Inn?
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh. Yes.
Wow.
Grandfather actually hid behind the wheel well, and a couple of bodies fell on top of him, so he was able to survive it.
Wow.
So you were literally steeped in this life up to your eyebrows, Frank. At what point, at what age did you realize that this is what you were born into?
Well, so in Chicago, you're not supposed to bring your kids into this life, okay? In Chicago, guys that were in this life didn't stand in front of social clubs in the 80s and 90s and the 70s. They went more underground, okay?
Yeah.
So I had an idea as a young kid in grammar school that my father was a little different. I grew up in an area, Elmwood Park, where there was a lot of guys in the life. Well, my friends' fathers were in the life too. We weren't supposed to. We didn't care about it. We played sports. I went to a Catholic high school. So what had happened was my father started grooming me a little as a teenager. He'd give me little tasks to do, and he'd always check me to see. The bad part about that was, for me, was I was good at what he told me to do. And I also was good with my hands. I won the Golden Gloves in 1990. I was 1980 in Chicago. I was undefeated as a heavyweight, the lightest heavyweight. So my father started giving me these little tests, and what he was doing is he was trying to teach me about life. Don't get in trouble, go to school, all these things. The problem was that in time, my father slowly started bringing me more and more into this.
Yeah.
And it got to the point where I bought into it, but I didn't buy into the mob. I didn't care about the mob. I couldn't be in the mob. I'm half Irish. What I bought into was family. What I bought into was my father. I bought into my uncle. That's how I got into this.
And what was your perception of these guys as a young teenager, just becoming aware of the world? How did you perceive your father and your uncle Nick?
Well, it was almost like there were two lives. I led a life like all my friends. Friends that were close to me had no idea at what point the stuff I was doing with my dad and my uncle. And I just, my thing was, let me do whatever I'm doing for my dad and do it good, because it's my dad. I want him to, I want him to love me. I want him to see that, hey, I'm here for you. But I wasn't real interested in it. But I just figured, hey, if my dad's telling me to do this, he's got my best interest at hand, right? He's not going to guide me on the wrong path. What dad would guide you down the wrong path?
Yeah.
And you wanted your father's approval, I would think.
And always. I idolized my dad. I idolized my uncle. It was all about family, and the hardest part that I had was, even though I can handle myself very well, I don't like violence. My dad used to constantly tell me, see, Frankie, you got to be meaner. I said, Dad, why do I have to be meaner? He goes, you're too nice to everybody. I says, I'd rather be nice. If they burn the bridge, I'll walk away than be mean. You know, that old love and fear thing. You know, he believed more in fear. I believed in love.
I think, Frank, a lot of people say, well, how could you wake up one morning and be in this life and not realize what you were doing? And I think what you do a good job explaining is it was a real slow gradient. He would start you off at one step, and then he would slowly work you up and slowly work you up. And anything becomes normal when it's very gradual. I mean, he wasn't starting you right off the bat and saying, hey, go collect. It was one thing at a time, correct?
Yes, very small stuff. A lot of long talks. We're talking about years. We're talking about the first time I do a little, hey, here, take this envelope and run it over to Joe. He's going to be on the corner in the parking lot. Just hand it to him. You know, don't ask no questions. Just hand it to him. Stuff like that. You know, and he was always watching me, and little things would happen. Like I talk about in the book. One time, this big guy walked up to my dad in the driveway, like they were going to start fighting. I'm in 7th, 8th grade. Okay, I run in the garage and grab a bat, and I'm coming up to my dad from the side, and he's seen it out of the corner of my eye. Little did I know, he didn't need me at that time, okay? But that was something that caught on. You know, he also liked the fact that I could be very nice, you know, until it was time not to be nice. And when I was not nice, I was also good at being not nice. When my dad gave me something to do, when I slowly got into it more and more, I didn't fear the police. I didn't fear anything. The only thing I feared was that if I didn't do this to the best of my ability and appease my...
Your father, yeah. Let me ask you, we passed over 3 pretty important things. You said half Irish. I know in New York that matters. I had no idea that mattered in Chicago. But is there a mafia, as you and I know mafia, in Chicago where they would care? Or
yes, there was. So it was structured a little different. So I believe through all my experience that what they were trying to do is the guys that came over from New York, they were trying to perfect the mistakes they made in New York. New York, they had 5 families. They fought a lot. In Chicago, there was 1 family.
Right.
They had a small inner circle of made members.
Yeah.
And you had to be 100% Italian. There was a ceremony, maybe not, you know, some ceremonies were a little different than others, but there was a ceremony. But you can be an associate in the Chicago outfit, and you can also be a boss. You can have a high ranking. You're not going to have that maid title. And there was.
The Greek, what was his name? Greek.
Gus Alex.
Gus Alex, yes. Humphreys. I mean, there was a lot of guys.
Right, yeah.
If you go back over the years, there were very important people, you know, right, you know, that had a high spot, but they were more of an associate. It was more about business in Chicago. They kept trying to get away from violence.
You know, I can introduce you to high-ranking law enforcement people who will swear to you there was never a mafia in, and I thought there had in Chicago, and I thought there had to have been. There had to have been influence. You know, it just makes sense.
This case opened up a lot of, you know, certain people opened up a lot of information that law enforcement did not know, because the majority of law enforcement's information comes from people that were in the life. So I just opened the doors to this case, okay? It was my uncle, Nick, that gave him, you know, he solved 40 murders. I have 302s. I have stuff that I'm going to be writing a second book that I'm going to tell you about people that killed people that's been pretty much verified and solved by the FBI, never made public. Okay, they have eyewitnesses. Most of the people are dead. In our case, you know, they were talking about this guy was the boss. That guy was the boss. And all of a sudden it comes out that Alphonse Tornabene was one of the bosses at the end. Jimmy Marcello was going to be the boss. The law enforcement did not know that until we brought it out. Now everybody talks about it like they knew that. Very few people knew that. Because I'm sorry. I just want to finish this real quick. The pizza guy was the guy that led the life the way the life was supposed to be led.
Yeah.
Nobody's supposed to know what you do. It's supposed to be underground. If you looked at the man, you wouldn't look at him twice. I used to go to a club in Chinatown with my dad, the old neighborhood Italian-American club. Every once in a while, he'd point to an old-timer during the Capone days. Yeah. He says, I'm not going to say that name. He says, but that guy, he would go like this. Because that guy that means he was a made guy back in the day. okay, from this organization. He said he could fill up this room with $100 bills. You'll never see his name in a newspaper, on law enforcement's radar or anything. So he would show me how important certain people were. But then, you read the newspapers, you see other stuff, and you're just like, wow,
Right. Other names, other people,
Yeah.
like Tornavine, the pizza guy, and like Carlisi,
Yeah.
who was very much under the radar, but he was at the top of the rung.
Right.
Yeah.
By the way, Frank, you can take as much time as you want. We don't have a limit. So you answer all you want as long as you want.
Yeah.
And our listeners are going to be, boy, fascinated.
Absolutely.
Just two more quick ones. You said they didn't, in Chicago now, didn't encourage the boys to follow the father in. And, I think about it, there's a few cases, but when you consider the number, really not many at all. But however, in New York, it's just a given in most cases, the kid will follow the father in. So what was it, an unspoken rule? Or?
Well, what they were trying to do is the idea for the mafia in Chicago, and again, they called it the outfit a lot because it just wasn't always Italian. You never heard of them call it La Costa Nostra in Chicago. They called it the outfit, they called it the mob.
Mm-hmm.
It was to make a better life for your kids. So you came here, you maybe didn't speak the language, you had a tough life, but you were trying to get ahead so your kids can go to college, so your kids can make something of themselves legally. And that was a rule here. In fact, when I got indicted, me and my brother, and we pled guilty for my father, Joe Ayupa's nephews, who I was very close with, and Joe Ayupa was a boss. He was upset. He says that man should have never got his kids involved. Angelo DePietro, my dad's boss, also was upset. Said to his granddaughter, hey, he should have never got them involved. Now, because there's so much paranoia, guys got their kids involved, but they tried to keep them off the radar. John Monteleone, his son supposedly, Sam Carlisi, his son supposedly. So like myself, there were guys that had their kids doing something. I don't know how far or not, but it was some things that they could trust their kid with that they didn't want to trust an outsider.
Yeah.
And I think like your father
as well, right?
Yeah.
I just wanted,
Ferriola was too, yeah.
I don't want to pass over Ed Hanley. I think people who are younger or who may not study the Chicago outfit, this guy was a serious historical figure. He was important. He was a power. He was a union guy. Can you just talk about, you knew him, I assume?
Yeah, he's my mother's brother. He was my mother's brother. We were our families were close.
He came around the house?
Pardon me?
He came around the house and you knew him? And
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yes, we're family. So let me tell you a little. My uncle Ed started out in local in Cicero. Okay, Ayupa and Accardo seen his potential. My uncle rose to be the international president of the Hotel and Restaurant Employees Union for over, I want to say, close to 30 years.
Right.
No, he was good at what he did. A lot of people in the union liked him. He can work with anybody, from presidents to, large companies, the Hyatts, all that. And he had a tough job because not only had to look out for his workers, but he also had to keep the mob happy too at the same time. And he did it well. He did it well. He was a good man. He was respected by a lot of people, and he was fair with people, and people liked that. I've never met anybody that did not like my uncle Ed. I've never had anybody say, oh, he's a piece of shit. I don't know if we can swear on that.
Yeah, you swear.
Yeah, you're good.
Piece of shit. He's no good. He's screwed. I never heard that. He was very diplomatic when it came. He also gave back to Ireland. He built youth centers there and stuff. So he was.
Did he?
Yeah, he did. Yeah. So he was well liked. And, I'm very proud of being half Irish and half Italian. Let me tell you something. Growing up in Chicago with that ethnic background, the only other thing that always was hard with me is I'm proud of both sides. Okay. And I wear it. But I used to watch the Italians and Irish fight all the time, and I couldn't understand it. But it was probably before my time.
Yeah.
Yeah. But so I had a great time growing up.
Yeah, my
Yeah.
My mother is Italian. Her father came over through Ellis Island, and her mother came over from Ireland. So she grew up in the Bronx. So yeah, it's the same.
So you can
same
experience the same thing I did. Yeah.
She did.
I think it's really important to point out that your uncle was one of the very few people who could keep a foot in both worlds.
Yeah.
So successfully. Like you said, Frank, he was able to work for his union members and keep a Cardo and a UPA happy at the same time. Look at what happened to Jimmy Hoffa, Red Dorfman. I mean, just down the
Jackie
list.
Presser, I mean, all these
Jackie
guys.
Presser.
Yeah.
That tried to do the same thing that your uncle did and failed, and it cost them their lives.
Yes.
Paul,
He was a brilliant man.
Paul, your family actually built the piers that our families arrived on, I guess, right?
Yeah, I guess so. That's right.
Mayflower didn't, or yeah?
Yeah, I do. I am a Mayflower descendant.
Wow.
I think that's an excellent point, Paul. I mean, Ed, when you look at the history of organized labor, as a and there is such a confluence of organized labor and organized crime, but Ed Handley's name pops up over and over, and somebody who was able to exist for that long in between the two, like Paul was saying, and like Frank has pointed out, you just don't see a figure walking that line, especially at such a high level with IOPA and Accardo, and also looking out for members, and you see like Paul said, look at Hoffa, who would be a similar figure, and or Roy Williams. I mean, they were the presidents of their unions, and they were as involved. I mean, the restaurant workers, restaurants and bars were only owned by
Third or fourth biggest union, and over 300,000 members at one time.
and
Right.
all restaurants and bars were owned by mob figures. So that's all he would be dealing with, and it's just such an incredible figure. And his name is mentioned all over Senate testimony.
It is still a relevant union in the days when unions aren't relevant. It's still a strong union. They're right downtown in D.C., their headquarters.
And then add on top of that the government was at his door day in and day out, just waiting for him to make one little mistake.
Yeah.
Sure.
And,
But even lower level union guys like Dominic Sinise, look what happened to him. He just upset Carlisi one time and he gets a bullet, which he survived, of course. But
right.
your uncle was quite a man.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about we do need to explain to people what Family Secrets was, and so we can give it a brief going over, but can I be a little note, if it's inappropriate, just tell me what goes on today with you, your family, your mother's still alive, I think.
Yeah, my mother's still alive. I have my mother, my two brothers.
What's the deal with that? I mean, are they like, that Frank, or do they understand what you were going through?
Well, the collateral damage that a family goes through with all this, everything we went through with my dad, it affected us all.
Yeah, there's trauma. Yeah.
And there's that old, maybe, he's not going to do this anymore. Maybe he'll come home to jail. Maybe he'll change. You're always looking for that unconditional love. Something is going to make him think. And the effect he had on my ex-wife, on my brother's ex-wife, other people around the family, he's really wrecked a lot of lives. My mother, my brothers, my uncle, some family members, we've learned to agree that maybe we don't all agree with exactly some of the things that happen, but we learn to get along as a family.
Yeah.
So, I have my brothers, I have my mother, I have some cousins. Me and my brother disagree on some stuff sometimes, but we're still brothers. So we know we could sit down and communicate. We're trying not to be like, I brought out a lot of my father for the longest time. At first, my mother, my dad's ex-wife, because he remarried and had other kids. She actually at first was, Frankie, I wish you wouldn't have did this. But, when it all came out, she was like, I did not know that I had a murderer as a husband. I did not know this. I did not know that he tried to bring you back in again after you got out of prison. When he swore my mother up and down, he wouldn't. But when everything came out and there's the tapes and everything, my father was a master manipulator.
Yeah.
Master manipulator, sociopath. So he can convince you, like he did publicly, oh, that my son's a drug addict, he's a chronic liar, he's all this stuff, okay? And when he got to court, he thought it was going to be a sit down. And on the street, a sit down, people have differences, you sit down. He thought he could go into court like that. Well, I knew my dad better than anybody. In fact, the government said they never had a cooperating witness that put so much work into what I did, because I knew this is not a game. This is not a joke. If this man gets out, he's going to kill me. You know, I'm not going to wait for him. I'm going to have to confront him the day he walks out the prison doors. This affects my kids. This affects everybody. So, you know, we do the best we can. We get along as a family, but what I did has a major effect on a lot of my family members. For a long time, a lot of them were concerned, you know, that, you know, something might happen to them.
You know, I come from a horrible childhood. My father was useless, but I mean, just thinking about what you just said, think about what he just said. My father's going to get out of prison and kill me. Jesus. I mean, this is you know, it's so hard to wrap yourself around, Frank. You know what I mean?
Well, a lot of people, if you read...
Everybody, really, except you. You're one of the few guys.
Well, most people say, I don't know how you made it, how you survived, how you function every day. You know, he did try to kill me. The reason he was trying to kill me is because I wanted out. I didn't want to do this. I never wanted to be a gangster. I wanted to go to college. I wanted to be a lawyer. I get more excited watching law stuff. I love restaurants. Okay. So, you know, he was mad that I wanted to leave. Now, when we went to jail, me and my brother pled guilty for him. We could have walked, but he would have hurt him. So we both pled guilty, and my brother sacrificed a lot, my younger brother, for that, because he was in the union too, and he was rising up. He was good at what he did. So I go to prison. I go in early. I have a powder cocaine problem. I talk about it in the book. Okay.
So did my brother, yeah.
And, you know, I get in, I'm in MCC, and I'm doing great time. I'm using this. I'm not saying, oh, I'm here for my dad. I'm using it for everything I did that I didn't get caught. I'm using it because I needed it at the time to change my life, to do the right thing. I'm a bad person. I got to be a better person. I got to be a family man. So in there, I'm doing good time. The day that it bothered me was when the list went up and I seen that I was going to Milan, Michigan, where my dad was at. I freaked out that day. I didn't know what to do. I said, how much worse are going to get? I'm going to go to the same prison as my dad. I wound up in Cherry Hut Penitentiary for 16 days, locked down in a hole during transportation. The holidays came, they closed down transportation. In that hole, I dug down deep inside of me and I said, what am I made of? What am I going to do here? Okay, how am I going to work this out? And what I did was, I came up with a plan. I'm going to confront my dad. I'm going to try to do the right thing. I want to work everything out.
Yeah.
Okay, but this time, I know my dad. And I'm going to watch him. I've learned. I'm going to see if he's manipulating me.
Yeah.
8 months I was in when I got to Milan. It was another 12 months before I sent that letter to the FBI. When I realized my dad, he ain't letting me go. He didn't change his ways. And I sat down, and this is doing good time. Guys from Chicago, guys from Boston, Ray Patriarca, Sonny Frank Chase, guys there. They're telling my dad, man, your son, we should all do time as good as your son. I ran the commissary. I was on the warden's board for appropriating funds in the prison.
Yeah.
I had a lot of spots, but I used it. You know, I use it, but I did stuff for a lot of people, but legally, you know, within the means, without getting in any trouble. And do you know when guys would go up to my dad and tell him that? You know what my dad told him one time? My son, he's like that because of me. What about me? I'm doing good time too. He was actually getting jealous that they were.
You're getting compliments.
Yeah.
Tell us about that long, dark night of the soul, Frank, when you had to deal with the fact that you had to do what you did. I mean, what kind of a struggle are you going with there in prison by yourself? You knew you had no choice. Tell us how you came to that realization.
Well, it wasn't overnight. It was 20 years in the making. Okay. But it was finally at that point where, you know how sometimes you know you got to make a decision, but all your choices suck.
Yeah.
And it came down to two choices. Do I wait till my dad gets out and confront him? Is he going to change? Okay. Or is he going to try to kill me? Okay. Oh, well, good. I'll wait for him. I'll kill him. Well, let me tell you something. He's pretty good at killing. He taught me a lot, but he's pretty good at killing. Or do I cooperate with the government, who I was raised in my neighborhood? That's the worst thing you can do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The plan that I had was this, and this is what a lot of people don't know unless you read the book or you get into my story, was I made a business deal with the government. No time off, pay all my fines, but I'm not going to help you take down the mob. This is about me and my dad. So in reality, all I did was open the doors. My dad tried to have my uncle killed too, my Uncle Nick. So where do you draw that line of family at what point? It's not the father I knew when I was younger. This life changed him. He's an animal. He could snap like that. So when I made this decision, I knew, look, I was going to be out in a couple of years. The drug program, everything. We're looking at 3 years. I did my time, a little less than 3 years. Okay. But I knew once I did this, this is going to be 10 years of my life. I'm going to have to move my family. So the easier thing would have been to just let it go and go home and stay away.
You know what I think we've skipped over, gentlemen, is really explaining who your father was.
Yes.
And people who haven't read the book really don't know how scary this was for you. Can you just spend a few minutes
It was Frank Calabrese Sr.
So growing up, my dad was a tough kid. He was a tough kid. He grew up with nothing. He only had an 8th grade education. And my dad, as a young kid, him and his brothers started a newspaper. Well, my grandfather bought the Stand, my dad's dad, and they started selling newspapers on Grand and State Street as young kids, 8, 10 years old, 11 years old, and started making money with it. And my dad started hustling. He would steal, and that's how he slowly got into it. My dad had a rough family life. He always talked about a story that bothered him, that, you know, for Christmas one year, he gave his parents $50, which was big in the 40s, right? And he says, look, all I want you to do is make sure you get my brothers and sisters gifts for Christmas. I just want a fishing pole. Christmas came, everybody got their stuff. There was food on the table. He never got the fishing pole. It bothered him.
Yeah.
My dad was fast with his hands. That was his downfall. But he was very good on the street with putting out money, with stealing, you know, and he talks about stories about stealing and what he would do. And he'd really think stuff out. Everything was planned out because he didn't want anybody to get hurt.
Can I ask a quick question? Can I interrupt for a minute, Frank? Let me ask you, you and I are about the same age. We're baby boomers. Our parents came from the same background, basically. I mean, I got knocked around as a kid. So with the caveat, the baby boomers get knocked around, it wasn't unusual. Parents hit kids. But my father also boxed, and you know, he had a hell of a temper. But did your father take a few shots at you kids?
Oh, all the time. But he never, not until I was older. I mean, so we'd get a kick in the rear, we'd get a hand in the ear pull, we'd get a slap in the back of the head.
Yeah.
You know, I got cracks a couple of times, and rightfully deserved when I was younger. You know, I wound up stealing clothes one time at 16 out of a store. He thought I bought them because the tags were on them. He thought I spent a ton of money. He goes, you shop at Sears like me. Crack, open hand to the side of the head. I go down. My thing was my dad was really fast with his hands. He was shorter than me. And I could never catch it. I would never raise my hands to my dad. But yeah, but it was when I got older, when I had my kids, and when he started losing, he had a bad temper and he couldn't control it. And that's why he stopped drinking, because he was a mean drunk. So he wouldn't drink because he knew he'd get mean. He didn't like the effects it had. He wasn't himself.
I'm sorry. The reason I'm asking these questions, not to be mean or nosy, we had the brothers on. I'm old and I have these moments.
Favorite brothers.
Okay. Yeah. Great guys. Joe and Nick, right?
Yes.
We're still getting emails from people who, you know, they touched them. They talked about, this is a side of the underworld you really don't hear much about. You know,
And
as a kid with parents like that, people have a great interest in this, because all we hear is the cold, and then he shot Louis and walked out, and that's it. Well, we also need to know then the father went home and punched his wife in the head or whatever the kid, so that's why I'm asking these things. I'm just.
Yeah, that's a good point, Jack. The Seaford brothers, they looked at Joey Lombardo as like an uncle, right? Because everybody says his uncle. It's around the family, in the neighborhood. All the kids play with him. All of a sudden, your dad gets killed. You're the outcast. No kids can play with you. Uncle Joey may have been the one that did it. How does that affect a young kid? And you're fatherless right now.
Badly. It affected them very badly.
There's a lot of guys that were involved in this trial, kids, and there's a lot of people I've talked to, and that's my interest, is how does this change your life? There's a lot of victims here that you don't hear about. Everybody hears about, Louis and Joey walked in and shot him. There's all this loyalty, the guy was a no good this. What's the fallout from that? And the kids, the family members.
Exactly. The wife and the children. Anyway, I took you. I'm sorry. Paul's right. We need to establish who your dad was. I'm sorry.
Okay. So my dad, him and a dear friend of his, Laurie Stubich, started giving out money, and they started doing real well. And I think I was either 4 or 5 years old. My mom remembers the day. We used to rent a house behind the old Norwood House restaurant where all the old-time gangsters hung. I believe it was Lawrence and Harlem.
Yep. And
one night, my mom said some guys came to the house. I believe it was Steve Iannarino and a few other guys, and brought my dad somewhere. Mm-hmm. And the story that my dad always told me was Angelo LaPietro. He says, you guys work for us now. So my dad started giving out money, and he was good at it. And then Angelo started grooming my dad like my dad was grooming me. And they always, in a life, when you get to a certain point, they're going to see if you're capable, and they'll ask you, if you will get involved in violence as far as going the length. If you say yeah, and you go somewhere, and you don't complete that, they have the right to kill you right there.
Means giving out money, loans, right?
Yeah, the loans, but then he started with enforcement and killing.
Wow.
Okay, and my dad was good. He was good at killing. In fact, his signature trait of killing you was with a rope and a knife. He'd strangle you, and then to make sure you were dead, he'd cut your throat from ear to ear.
Wow.
So he was brought in by LaPietro.
Yes.
And who was a notoriously violent man who rose very high in the outfit because of his violence and his ruthlessness. I think we should also say LaPietro is somebody who rose.
He was
very
one
high.
of LaPietro. They out of the Cicero and Chinatown crews. Those were the crews that did heavy work. Work was violence, and they were good at it. And you had your own crew. Years later, they started mixing crews in, and that's when all the problems started. Okay, because everything was changing. But yeah, they were a very skilled and very good killing team, or hit team, whatever you want to call it. And that's where my dad came. And I remember my dad, as I was getting involved in my late teens, early 20s, we lived in a 3-flat. We used to call it the compound. It was all family. Me and my brother were in the basement apartment, and I'd hear my dad walking around at night. I can hear him walk into the front window. I can hear him walk into the side window. He started changing. We used to have a house full of people when we were young, families, big parties. It started being, he didn't want nobody in the house. We watched as a family, my dad change. Started getting quicker with his hands. He always said at one point, don't bring the street in the home, it corrodes the family structure.
Yeah.
He broke that. He started bringing it in the home, and it did. It did start changing all of us.
Yeah.
It really corrupted who he was.
Yes. And to the point where there were no lines no more. My Uncle Nick wanted out, but it would have been a little harder. He wanted away from my dad, okay? And my Uncle Nick was a good-hearted person. I call him more of a soldier. My Uncle Nick just didn't get an itch if you looked at him the wrong way to kill you, okay? He only killed upon orders. He would help you before he hurt you. But when he was given an order, he followed it like a soldier. When my dad and my Uncle Nick were butting heads, my dad and Ronnie tried to get my Uncle Nick out of the house to meet him somewhere. They wanted to get rid of him because they knew he knew too much, okay? My dad did the same thing with me. When I wanted out, he set me up in a garage, and that's what I talk about in the book. My dad got to the point where he tells me one time, on the tapes when we were in prison, we were talking about my Uncle Ed. He says, he goes, I got to tell you a story one time. He says, Uncle Ed was drunk and he was bad-mouthing the Italians, and it got back to Iupa. So he says, I was told by Angelo that we were going to sit outside on the street, and they went into the bathhouse. I don't know if it's the Russian bathhouse on Chicago Avenue. If Joey comes out and gives us a signal, that means your uncle's got to go.
Whoa.
I go, really? He goes, yeah. I go, so what was the whole thing of the meeting? He says, well, Joey was trying to get him so mad that maybe he would say something about Italians to him or raise his voice to him. But my uncle was smart, okay?
Yeah.
And when they walked out, he didn't get the signal. So everything was fine, you know?
Yeah.
But my dad, I looked at him, I said, Dad, and this is on tape. I says, and it's never been made public. I go, you would have killed Uncle Ed? He goes, well, he goes, yeah. He goes, that's my first family. I have to, you know, follow those rules. He goes, what I was going to do is I was going to get a hold of him and say, hey, your sister, my dad's wife, my mother, had a problem. Can you take a ride with me? I need you to help me with her. And that's how he was going to get him somewhere. And he was actually going to have him killed. When I told my mother, she almost had tears in her eyes.
Yeah.
My dad, that line in the sand was gone. My dad remarried. His wife that he remarried, the father was the police chief of Melrose Park, Dominic Semino.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
My dad.
Now, Frank, I'm glad you said that was his first family, and you said the streets sort of changed your father. I guess it's kind of, as he got deeper in the outfit, that did become his first family, and you all became his second family. And you see that, you read about that change a lot, and you see it in a lot of these guys, but you literally did become his second family. And I guess he treated y'all as second, you know, as the second most important thing. Does that sound about right? The outfit was his first family, and you all came second.
Yeah, but the hard part about it was you never knew what dad you were dealing with. One moment you had a dad sitting there that you were his first family, and then that moment he was right there telling you. And this is what I'm getting at. And this is where he calls me one night. So the Seminos lived in Melrose. He calls me to come over. I was living in Melrose for a while. My wife's at home. My daughter, my son's sleeping. I go over. He goes, come on, let's walk out in the garage. We walk in Semino's garage, and he's looking around. And I'm like, what's up, Dad? Now, me and him are not in the best relationship right now. Off and on. I'm trying to get away from him. He says, yeah. He goes, Diane's father's got to go. I go, what? He goes, we got to go. He goes, I got the plan. He goes, let me tell you. He goes, you know why? He goes, he's got my wife brainwashed. She drops everything for him. My dad was actually jealous of his wife's father, their closeness. And I'm like, oh, no. And he looks at me. He says, yeah, so this is what we're going to do. I'll get him in here. You'll be waiting in here. So he's setting up this whole thing. And I'm thinking to myself, this man's flipped. And the other thing I was thinking was this. My dad, if he got caught, he was going to blame me. To say I did it. Okay. And he would have walked and I would have went to jail forever. Well, that day never came. He told me one day, he goes, no, it's all good. You know, I mean, you cross my dad and say the wrong thing to him at that point when he was in the end, he can flip on you like that.
Let me ask you two questions. Just quickly, was it the paranoia? Was it the life? Did he have mental health problems? I mean, you got to admit, that's kind of whack, you know, to kill your father-in-law because you're jealous of.
It's called criminal justification. I mean, you start saying, you know, look, I'd say walk up to a guy and say, what's wrong with you? What are you talking about? Look what you made me do. You made me beat the shit out of you.
Yeah.
The guy, why would you do that? Why didn't you just pay me?
That's a good point. Yeah.
You know, it helped. But they tell you, and they believe it. They believe it. It's an addiction to this. You know, my dad had a chance. Me and my brother were in legitimate businesses. My dad got sick. I'd go down to the club. Everybody like, how was your dad? I didn't want to lie. So I'd say, yeah, he's good, like that. They're thinking I'm just trying to play it up, right? I go, Dad, you got an out. He goes, I know. I go, you got an out. You can step back and retire because you're sick.
Yeah.
Use that. Me and Kurt, you got a ton of money to do it. He was going to do it for the longest time. He was going down to Florida. One day he comes up to me. He says, I got to go down to the club. I got to put these guys back in line. He could not leave the life. It wasn't about the money. It was the addiction to the street and the power. And you see it in so many aspects and so many people in life. They can't let go.
Yeah. Is that a psychological term or a therapy term? I forgot what was it that you did, how you described your father? Defense.
This criminal justification. That's just how.
Is that an actual term from?
Yes. Yes. Well,
It's criminal thinking and minimization. And we see that in the criminal justice system all the time. Criminal thinking.
whole chart, isn't there? I mean, it's. I did a speaking event with somebody from Loyola that was a psychologist or something. He had this chart. I'm sitting there with the guys I wrote with. I go, oh my God. They go, what?
Isn't that?
That's wow.
And that's so enlightening when you see, oh my gosh, there actually is something wrong, and it's like, oh, if you don't feel like you're alone when you see there's something actually going on. It's like somebody turns a light on. You're like, that's what it's been all along.
My dad groomed me to be likable, to get close to people, let them think they're your friend, you're their friend. Let them confide in you. We're going to find out their weaknesses. We're going to find out their vices. We're going to find out what they have to take from them. That's what I was trained. That's what I was raised to do. And I started doing it at some point. So I'll never sit here and say I'm a victim in this. I'm just telling you my life story and what happened,
And I respect that. Hey, I had just two questions. When you say you're, for him to get out, you to get out, your brother to get out, most people, me too, assume that you just die in that thing. So you're saying that at some point, let's say your dad hit the lottery, I don't know, he's 40 years old. It is possible for him to say, thank you, I'm going to go to Wyoming, or wouldn't they say, no, you're not?
Yeah, no, it's not easy to get out. But where you see a lot of guys step back and retire is when a guy gets older and he gets sick. So they'll look more to him for advice, consultation. But if they tell you, and you've seen it in Sopranos, the one old guy, I think Bobby Bacala's father, or something, okay, they wanted him to do a hit because he was the only guy that can get close to that guy. But he was retired, is what he was. So yeah, you could step back and retire, but if they call you, you gotta come.
Yeah, I think Gussie Alex wanted to get out because he had bad nerves. He had bad nerves, Gussie Alex, and they kept they wouldn't let him go. So the outfit has a history of that too.
My father carried a BAR in World War II, Browning automatic rifle. He killed obviously a lot of Nazis. So, and he would tell you all these. I mean, he could talk for hours about the war. He was a young boy. He was the war and he always brought you that close, but he never told you he shot a German. He always went around it. And then was your father the same generation when it came to these mob hits? Did he talk about it, and was he graphic, or did he just? So
he was very military-like. It was a need-to-know basis, and he would leave stuff out just in case. Yeah. He would never, like you said, he'd bring you this close. So he'd tell me about it. He might not tell me who exactly was there. He'll tell me his role, tell me about some, just during our conversation if it needed to fit. Now, the reason he told me about so much, and I know I'm jumping ahead real quick, when we were in prison, was because I made my dad believe that I wanted back in. See, he's seen this 18 months we were together. He's seen the great time I was doing in prison.
Yeah.
Okay. And he thought, this is it. I'm going to bring him back in. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. So what he was doing was, people are like, oh, he was just bragging. No, he wanted me to know who to respect, who to fear, who to watch out for. Because you got to remember, before I go into prison, I'm not really talking to my dad for years. I'm out of this life pretty much. What I was doing was my own stuff that he didn't know about, selling the cocaine, putting money out on the side, getting in different businesses. So that's why he was talking to me. And there, he told me a lot in detail. Because, it was just like we had this, I don't know, I don't understand, because when they asked me if I wanted to wear wire, I said, my dad's not going to say anything. And then I thought about it, and I'm like, you know what, the only way to get my dad is in his own words, because he's such a good manipulator. He'll get out of all this. So I decided to wear wire, and I said, look, I don't think he's going to say anything. Well, I knew my dad better than anybody, so I knew when to pursue, when to back off, and I did it. And that's actually what got my dad, was his own words.
Yeah. But I'm sorry. So I just wanted to clear that up for people there. But anyway, and your father, who was he, to go back on track to where we were? So
yeah, my dad. So my dad, the thing that stopped him from moving up faster was he was too violent, and they were trying to get away from violence, you know, and he can go off like that. You know, it's like, you know, violence is good only when I say it, you know, for my reason.
Yeah.
For years, Tony Accardo was trying to get away from violence until his house got broken into, and he wanted to leave a message on the street to everybody. Well, the feds got the message, and from that point on, the mob slowly started going down. They started going after him.
Yeah.
So you have a criminal, you have a bunch of criminals, and it's funny because they'll want to get away from violence, but there's something that ticks them. And
Yeah.
my dad was one of those. So my dad,
That.
the biggest loan shark on the street, or one of the biggest, at times as much as $1 million on the street.
Wow.
He never talked about moving up, because it's not good to talk about moving up in that life. The guy above you might be paranoid, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And he did always turned in money. He said, son, don't ever take money. You turn it in. You want to be needed. Once you're not needed, they can get rid of you. So he'd always turn money in. I mean, some months as much as $30,000 to Angelo he turned in. That's Angelo's end. And my dad worked hard. He was good with money. He had I tell you what, in a Fortune 500 company, I think my dad would have been unbelievable. Take away his violent side. So he had a lot of, and he had a lot of power on the street. He was a good guy on the street. They don't give out titles easily. So he never got a big title. I mean, another story that you hear about right now, and a lot of the sites, Michael Spilaccio's son has been talking about his uncle and his dad. And there's a lot of say out there, well, you know, Tony Spilaccio wasn't this or he wasn't that. Tony Spilaccio had a very, very powerful position without the title. Very powerful position. He was a very important part of the mob, but he didn't have a title. In Chicago, they did not give out titles easily.
Yeah.
And you didn't need a title to be an important person.
I think, you know, we see how different guys relate to each other, and whether it's pictures or whatever. How did your father relate on a day-to-day with different guys? I mean, I know that Angelo was kind of a rough guy, but when you encountered other outfit guys, I mean, we know your father had some antisocial tendencies, but when you would encounter guys on the street, how was he relating to them? I mean, these are a bunch of antisocial guys. How do they get along?
Oh, my dad got along with a lot of guys. I mean, he showed respect when he needed to show respect.
Mm-hmm.
My dad, over the years, more and more became more of a homebody. He didn't want to be around. So we were told you can't hang around with guys you work with. So don't go to the mob bar where everybody's at and hang in there where the FBI is sitting outside. You know,
yeah.
Our crew, we go out to eat once a month. My dad would take a bunch of us, and we would go to a restaurant out of the way where we can have a back private room or anything like that. That was the only socializing you were supposed to do. I've heard that a lot of guys didn't like my father for some of his ways. But I always seen a mutual respect whenever my dad wasn't around. I mean, when my dad was around them. So just to give you an idea, Johnny DeFranzo wanted to they had a business together, my dad, Johnny, and a couple other guys. They had a hot dog stand in Melrose Park on Armitage and Manheim. And Johnny was in a good position, okay, in a high position, and he wanted to bring my father with their crew, and that meant leave Angelo. And my father told that story many times. He goes, I would have loved to go with Johnny. Johnny made a lot of legitimate money for his guys and himself.
Yeah.
And my dad wanted to get to the money. He says, but I couldn't. He goes, because here's the thing. One, is Johnny trying to set me up? Is Angelo having him do that? I'm dead. And two, if Angelo ever became the boss and Johnny goes, first person he's going to kill is me. So even though he says I might not be 100% happy where I'm at,
Yeah.
you say anything to anybody. So he was very smart like that.
Yeah.
I'm sorry I manipulate. I don't mean to, but you know, you hear enough about this no-nose DeFranzo. Is it DeFranzo?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But nobody knows anything about him. Did you know him?
Yeah. I grew up in Elmwood Park. Johnny ran Elmwood Park. I know Johnny. I know Joey Andriacchi. I mean, Johnny was a real nice guy. When I was growing up, he was always real nice to me. Him and my dad were close. They were just from different crews.
Yeah.
Johnny made a lot. Johnny and Joey Andriacchi made a lot of money. They owned the big Camillus Towers in Elmwood Park. They owned tons of big buildings like that in Oak Park. He made so much legitimate money, car dealerships and everything.
Yeah.
My dad was saying on the tapes how much he thought he was worth, but it was astronomical numbers. And that was the hardest part about for the government, is because this man's making so much legitimate money.
Yeah.
You show, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
He was a pretty smart guy.
Yeah, and I was just going to say, the impression I have, I don't know, but what I've read is he was smarter than the average bear in the upper world or underworld, is what it seemed like. His construction business, they say, was worth tens of millions of dollars.
Yeah, he built his, so his brother ran that, Peter, and then, the big problem Johnny had was his brother Joey had to go on the lam because of the pot growing business.
Yeah.
You know, Frank, I was a federal law clerk during that trial.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of speculation about John and whether he knew what his brother was doing or not, and that Carlisi wanted Joey killed over the whole thing. Did you ever hear anything about that?
That was big. That was big at the time. So my dad told me that Johnny told him that he doesn't know where his brother's at, which was an all-out lie, because a friend of mine, a guy named Frank Calabrese, they were hiding him at his house in Port St. Lucie.
Oh, Frank had him at his house.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Florida. Yeah, they had him at the house for a while in Florida. So, yeah. And so Johnny was telling everybody, but in the meantime, it's his brother. So, but yeah, they wanted him dead because it was bringing a lot of heat.
Yeah.
So I suppose at some point DeFranco had to tell Carlisi eye to eye, I don't know where Joey is.
Definitely. That's what my dad told me, that he was telling everybody. That he doesn't know where he is. If he found him, he'll bring him in himself.
What a terrible position to be in. I can't even imagine. He was gone for quite a while, wasn't he, Frank?
Yeah, and that's where there's a lot of speculation now. And a lot of guys on the street believe that Johnny started cooperating. He's got more money than anything. He's not a violent guy. His brother, and I may be wrong, you might correct me, but his brother went to MCC, and then all of a sudden, that was it. You never heard anything else.
Huh.
Right. Everybody in the crew got convicted.
Yeah, and they all got long prison terms, didn't they?
They did, and some of them are out now, but they never produced a single ounce of usable marijuana. It was a big failure.
Storage facility or something way out that they were going to grow it in or something?
They took a house over one of the heirs of the McDonald fortune out in Oak Brook, and he owed one of them money from gambling. And they said, here's how you can pay us. We're going to take your house and turn it into a big indoor marijuana grow. And none of them knew anything about growing marijuana. And it was a huge failure, and they all wound up in prison.
Yeah. Yeah, and then when Joey did turn himself, you're on the lam and you're charged, and you know, he was probably the nuttiest out of all the brothers. Okay? And he was always getting in trouble. He was probably the most physical one out of all brothers as they got older too, you know, as far as violent. I think that he might have not even all been good in the head. You know?
Setting up a marijuana grow in one of the McDonald's houses in the middle of a neighborhood like that, when you're at that level and your brother is who he is, you know, I think there's probably better ways to make a buck. I mean, I'm just guessing.
Yeah. Brothers thought like huge big box business, and he thought like a street guy.
So
yeah, without the skill to put it together.
Yeah. So there's always been some speculation that between his brother getting out and when he got caught up, Johnny DeFranco, in that thing with the Indian tribes, that Johnny started cooperating, started giving them, you know, and you know, Johnny was one of the guys that brought the Spilatros to the to where they got killed, and
really,
yeah, and he never got indicted. But I think because if you follow the trial, everybody got indicted. I mean, everybody got convicted on not what my uncle testified to, but with what my uncle testified to and my dad said on the tapes.
Right.
No.
So they didn't really, I'm sorry.
No. Go ahead, Frank. I'm sorry. I'm thinking out loud. But I was thinking, when you maybe we could get into your uncle's story on that night with the Spilatros. Because I think you're one of the few people who has heard that firsthand. I think there's a lot of speculation. People have read it, but I think you're one of the few people probably in the world who has heard that story firsthand. And
there's a lot more to the story that I'm going to be writing in the second book. I have all.
Well, then I don't want you to give anything away that you're gonna.
I'm going to give you a quick overview without going into a lot of detail. So, a lot of extortion started. A lot of big extortion started when the bosses all got indicted for the Las Vegas skim.
Yeah.
They wanted everybody out in the street because they wanted to raise as much money as they could because they wanted to have the best law team in the country so they could try to get out of this.
Yeah.
So extortion stories in my book were part of that, you know, extorting Connie's Pizza for a few $100,000. I mean, cacciatore real estate. I mean, all this extortion started. So Joey Aiuppa, I remember we were close with the Spilatros, mostly Michael Spilatro, another guy named Tony Centracchio that was close with the Spilatros. These guys were all close with my dad. My dad and Tony grew up together. They had differences at times, but from what my dad told me, they had a mutual respect for one another. There was word that came back. So I was sitting with my dad and my uncle when we would do our book work and stuff, or we'd go sit out by a bench that they're putting a hit team together to go to Las Vegas to kill Tony Spilatro.
Really?
Yeah, it was kind of, and Joe Aiuppa gave the order. He wanted them killed, and he wanted them killed before they went to prison. Now, I never knew the reasons exactly.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yeah.
Well, there was a lot of talk. The talk was, one, Rosenthal's wife. Number two, Tony was dealing with drugs out in Vegas. Okay, there were drugs coming out of Hoagie's, his brother's place in Chicago. I knew that. In fact, it's kind of funny because one time my dad says, well, there's word right around that time, there's word coming back that he's dealing with cocaine, you know? And I tell him, I says, yeah, they are out of Hoagie's. And my dad looks at me, goes, well, how do you know that?
Yeah.
I almost gave myself up.
Yeah.
Oh, because I heard from other people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
You know, I heard it.
yeah. So when that first came, my father was in Florida. My uncle gets a call. He's got to go out to Vegas. He's out there with a hit team. I'm going to name all the guys on the hit team later on in the book, and they're supposed to kill Tony Spilatro.
Yeah.
Okay. One of the guys out there is Frankie Swice. They got an Uzi with them. They got some explosives. They got some other guns. There's, I think, 6 or 7 guys on the hit team. Paulie Shiro was one of them. He was in the case. Hansen, that was out in San Diego, guys that Tony knew. And they were trying to survey Tony, and they were having a hard time. John Ficarata was the leader of the group. Jimmy DeForty was out there for a while too. And it was crazy because, you know, when they call you, they don't tell you what you're doing. They just call you. They tell you to be somewhere, hop on a train, take this out there. My uncle's carrying a bag or something. He doesn't know what's in there. It's told not to open it, you know, and next thing you know, they're out. And now they're having a hard time. And so then they have some other guys on the list that they're giving them to kill. One of them was Emilio Vassi. They thought that Emilio was, they thought he talked in the grand jury because he was in there for so long. And the FBI confirmed he never said a word. Oh. So one of the murders that were killed was while they were out there. They went over to Phoenix. They did that. They were looking for another guy. So all of a sudden, my uncle gets called back. Well, why they're out there, Jim Hansen and was it Jimmy Hansen? No, not Jim Hansen.
Ken?
I forgot his first name. He was part of Tony Spilatro's crew at one time. Him and Shiro, they see John Ficarata following them one day, and they get scared. They think that they're going to get killed after it's done with that. So they just leave. They don't tell anybody, and they leave. They come back to the city, and they see who they need to see, and they're convinced that you guys are not on a list. You guys are fine. Go back. So they went back. My uncle seen John following him a couple of times, and he started thinking the same thing. So they call my uncle comes back for a couple of days, and my dad comes home, and he brings my dad up to date what's going on. My dad was not involved in this because that's when he had surgery with his pituitary gland. My uncle's concerned. what's up with John? Is he going to get killed? So he brings a gun back with him, just in case. They can't get Tony, and they're called back. Now, when they killed Emilio Visi in the case, you hear about them finding a gun wrapped up in the tarp. That wasn't the murder weapon. That was the gun my uncle had on me in case somebody was going to try to kill him. The other guys didn't know that he had that gun on him. It was for his own safety. That's how crazy it was. So when they came back to Chicago, I don't know if it was John Ficarata or who it was, came up with a plan. And now at this point, Frankie Swice is out of it. Now, Frankie Swice is not a made member. He's half German, but he's a high-ranking, one of the most feared hitmen in the city. He's very good at what he does.
In the country.
In the country. In fact, while they were out there, and you remember I talked about this on this tour, when my uncle came back, he goes, man, that Frankie Swice is crazy. He goes, why? He goes, he came up with a plan. He knew where Tony was going to be on this day at this time coming out of the federal courthouse in downtown Las Vegas. We had an Uzi. He wanted us to pull up. He was going to jump out of the car and gun Tony down right in front of the federal courthouse. You know, they actually thought about that until they remembered Las Vegas, Ocean's 11. There's only 2 ways in and out. They would never be able to get out of the city or hide in the city. That's the only reason they didn't do it. That's how crazy Frankie Swice was.
Oh, I've heard that story, but until now, I never knew it was true.
Yeah. And so when they came back, they came up with a plan. They were gonna promote Tony to have the official title of a captain. But like I said, Tony was a very, very important man in the Chicago mob. And my dad would say, I think one of the reasons Upa wanted him dead was because he knew that while he was away, Tony would take over, become too powerful. That's one of the things he thought. So they thought the only way they could do this was to get Tony for a making ceremony, and then they wanted to get his brother too. Michael should have never got killed. They were that criminal justification. Well, you know, he got cocky with me on the street one time. You know, Michael, a lot of people liked Michael. He was a very good person. I knew him very well because we were around him all the time. So they told Tony that, you know, they're going to make you a boss and Michael's going to be a made member. Now everybody's like, well, why would you go? You know you're falling out. You know you're fighting. Well, what a lot of people don't know about this life is when you're whistled in, if you don't come, I don't care if your mother's on your deathbed. Okay, if you don't come, it's an automatic death penalty. So they were pretty sure that something wasn't right. The day they went, told the wives, if we're not home by 9 o'clock, something's wrong. Okay, they took all their jewelry off, put it in plastic bags. That's what my uncle testified to. Okay, Tony hit a small caliber gun on Michael, just in case. You're told to be in a parking lot somewhere and you get picked up. My uncle got picked up the same way in another parking lot that day. They take you to a house. They go in the basement. People say, well, how can your uncle not remember? My uncle was concerned that, was he getting killed that day too? Because, you know, it's like, hey, we're going to this party. Oh, okay, great. Oh, guess what? You're the surprise guest. Bam, you're dead. So he didn't.
And 40 years ago, those houses all look the same, driving through those neighborhoods. You're not familiar. I mean, you know,
yeah, you're in a car with Jimmy LaPetra. You're in a car with John Ficarata. You're in a car with these guys that killed many people, and you watch them kill and torture, and you're worried about what street you're on? Oh,
it's
you're
11:31.
And you're going to kill a man, 2 men, and one of them you know well. So when the brothers came down the stairs, there was a bunch of guys downstairs, and my uncle said there were guys there he didn't know. Okay, there was a lot of guys there, but they had to be made guys. So when they were coming down the stairs, all the guys walked to them like they were going to shake their hands and hug them to get the ceremony going. So Frankie Swice wasn't there because if they would have seen Frankie Swice, because Tony and Michael had told their wives, if you see Frankie Swice around the house, call the police, something ain't right. Call the police. So my uncle jumped and grabbed Michael between the legs. It's a bear hug tactic. If one guy grabs between the legs, the other guy grabs around the arms. I don't care how strong you are, it's tough to get out of that. Okay, Louis Ebele threw a rope over Michael's neck and strangled him. My uncle found the gun on Michael and handed it to Johnny DeFranzo. For a while, Johnny DeFranzo was playing with it. He couldn't get the bullets out of it to make sure it was safe. In the meantime, a bunch of other guys are on Tony. Michael's not fighting back. Again, this is sick. This is sick. You know, I'm being described that, oh, you know, Michael just kind of just let it be and he died. Tony's yelling, you guys are going to get in trouble. He's trying to fight back. And that's the part where my uncle said that Tony asked to say a act of contrition, a final prayer. And I was like, well, did they let him say it? He goes, I don't know. I didn't hear anything else. There was a lot going on. I was concerned about my own life. The other thing he had mentioned was that during all of this, when John Ficarata was there, see, John was taking the money that was being sent out to Vegas and spending it, gambling it. But when the bosses found out, they were mad at him. John also brought his deceased brother's wife around and introduced her to everybody. Big no-no. These guys are out here on a work detail. Nobody's supposed to know they're there. So John, and then John had stiffed Johnny DeFranco. Johnny Ficarata had stiffed Johnny DeFranco on a car thing at the car dealership. So a lot of the bosses had had enough. And while they were in Vegas, John and my uncle went out one night. John won some money, and he told my uncle to sign the IRS slip. And my uncle just did it. He didn't think, because when he told us, my dad was mad. And we're like, what'd you sign it for? They put you in Vegas. He's like, I don't know. I'm a soldier. My boss tells me to sign it. I think he's got my best interest at hand. No, Nick, you don't do that. So when all this stuff was going on, finally, my dad had told Angela what John was doing, and that was enough. And that's what gets into the hit of John. The brothers were killed, and John ran in the bathroom at one point and wouldn't come out, Ficarata, because he thought he was going to get killed. When he walked out, he was white as a ghost because he was concerned. Sam Carlisi nudges my uncle and says, hey, look at John's tan. His Vegas tan don't look so good right now. Huh? You should have thought about that. My uncle and the other guys were taken, so he don't know where the bodies are because they don't want anybody to know the bodies were. They left a couple guys behind who I don't know. The one thing I'll always tell you, if I don't know something, I don't know something. I'm not going to speculate and guess or say I read it somewhere. But he didn't know. And then when the bodies were not supposed to be found, and when they were found, that's when all hell broke loose. Mm-hmm. So that's the Spilotro story. You know, showing criminal justification. They're killing Michael for no reason. He didn't do anything wrong. I don't know personally what Tony did wrong. I mean, we can watch and see he was doing a lot of stuff. But
that final act of contrition, when you first told that story, and you know, you've really got a way of framing things, Frank. I told you that years ago, but when you that act of contrition is what really makes this whole thing real. I think that's what really strikes me. Is it's one thing to picture these guys as mobsters and tough and whatever, but to think of you know, the Joe Pesci character or whatever, but then you see a man acting to say one final act of contrition as his brother is dying next to him. That really places things in a separate context. It does to me. I think that makes it much more powerful, and you realize that these are human beings.
Well, I mean, yeah, look at it from Tony's view, okay? I know Tony did a lot of stuff wrong, but here he is in a basement. He knows he's going to die. He knows he's getting out of it, and he's got to look over at his brother. That he knows his brother doesn't deserve this. His brother didn't do anything at that point, in that moment, that his brother was the decoy. His brother was the setup, and you're watching him, and and I can only imagine what's going through your mind. I can tell you what went through my mind that day when my dad had those glassy-eyed look and he had that gun in my face and he wanted to kill me. I could tell you. It's I hope you guys never have to experience it, okay? Because I was scared and I don't know how I got out of it. My dad was not a guy to threaten you and not follow through. He would do it. He didn't need to threaten you. And I don't know what made it out of there that day. But in the same thing, you're right. It's that side that people don't think about, that you don't see in the movies.
Frank, we've gone over can I ask you if you would do a follow-up right now? We've hit an hour, and that's, I think, can you stand by for a minute and we'll start another one? Oh, that'd be fantastic. Thank you so much.
Yeah, this is. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, so we'll just start another recording, okay?
Okay.
Yeah.
Hey, listen, I can't get enough of this. Is wow. I just want, before we leave, to tell the listeners that story is going to be in your next book, I think you said, right?
Yeah, I'm going to go in more detail with it. I have a lot of, so when my father passed on in prison, because I was the oldest and he had divorced his new wife, I got all his personal stuff. And in his personal stuff were boxes of all the court stuff, everybody's testimony, 302s. I mean, I have so much, all my uncle's testimony. I also have all transcripts from, I have a folder like this thick of all the transcripts from the recordings with me and my dad when we were in prison. So much stuff not talked about. In fact, when I talked about my Uncle Ed and Iupo, you know, maybe having them killed, I never talked about that before. So you guys know on your show.
Frank.
Yeah, so I'm gonna, there's a lot of stuff I want to, but if you want to talk about family stuff, if you want to talk about like what we're talking about, yeah, talk to me.
Yeah.
If you want to sit down and talk about who was who and who did what and all that, that's not my category. I wasn't made member. I'm telling you what I've experienced and what I heard and what I've seen.
And I think we've had enough of that. I really think they run a more humane side.
Yeah, that's what I think you're right.
Yeah. All right, I'm going to stop here and thank you. We'll be right back.